dead burn.
God help us.
Don't turn a deaf ear.
Blood, Demons, and Terrifying Secrets. Evil Dead Burn 2026 takes horror to another level. Stay till the end for hidden facts you probably missed. Only on Kali Facts. Evil Dead Burn is a 2026 American supernatural horror movie directed and co-written by Sebastian Vanecek. The movie is produced by Rob Tappert and Evil Dead creator Sam Raimi. It is a sequel to Evil Dead Rise 2023 and the sixth movie in the Evil Dead film series. The movie stars Suhela Yaqub as a young woman who is looking for comfort and support from her in-laws after her husband dies. When the whole family gets together at a remote house, things quickly go off the rails and turn into a family reunion from hell as the family members slowly become deadites. The movie also features Tandi Wright, Hunter Doohan, Lucian Buchanan, Errol Shand, and Maud Davey in supporting roles. The sixth Evil Dead movie was officially announced in February 2024, with Sebastian Vanecek brought on to direct the film. He also co-wrote the script with Florent Bernard. Sam Raimi and Robert Tappert came on board as producers, while Ghost House Pictures handled the production. In December 2024, Vanecek revealed that the movie would be called Evil Dead Burn and was tentatively planned for a 2026 release. Casting for the movie started in May 2025. Production then kicked off in July and wrapped up in October of the same year, with filming taking place in New Zealand. Evil Dead Burn hit theaters in France on July 8, 2026, and then arrived in the United States on July 10. Warner Bros. Pictures handled the movie's release in North American theaters, while Sony Pictures Releasing released it internationally through its Screen Gems banner. The movie received mostly positive reviews from critics and has made $64 million worldwide against a production budget of $20 million. At his family's lake house, Joseph Price is researching the work of his late grandfather Benjamin, who spent years studying the Necronomicon and the terrifying Deadites. During his research, Joseph discovers the Kandarian dagger, a powerful weapon that Benjamin believed could destroy Deadites. But Joseph's discovery catches the attention of a deadite named Jessica. She brutally murders two fishermen before heading toward Joseph. Meanwhile, Joseph's brother Will gets into a heated argument with his wife Alice. Upset and drunk, Will gets behind the wheel and drives away. While driving, he crashes his car into Jessica. As Will burns to death inside the wreck, Jessica reads a passage from the Necronomicon and transfers the deadite possession into Will's body. Sometime later, Alice, Joseph, his girlfriend Thea, his parents Susan and Edgar, and his grandmother Polly all come together for Will's cremation. Alice has a hard time connecting with Susan and Edgar because they blame her for the car crash that killed Will. After the funeral service, Edgar secretly goes to Will's coffin before the cremation begins. Suddenly, Will's deadite body breaks out of the coffin, burns Edgar, and kills the person working at the crematorium. The family then returns to their lake house, but Edgar slowly starts to become possessed by a deadite. During a very tense family dinner, Edgar suddenly stabs the family dog, Max, to death before collapsing. Joseph and Thea try to take Edgar to the hospital, but he crashes the car and kills Thea. Joseph manages to escape and runs away. Back at the house, Alice discovers Benjamin's old research. She almost reads from the Necronomicon but is suddenly attacked by Max, who has now returned as a possessed deadite dog. Joseph eventually makes it back to the house, only to discover that Thea has suddenly returned. However, she is now a deadite too. The family quickly locks her in the basement and tries to escape the house, but they are forced to turn back when Edgar and the possessed Max show up and attack them. While the rest of the family barricades themselves inside the house, Thea tricks Polly into opening the basement door and letting her out. Thea then goes on a brutal rampage, attacking the entire family while searching for the Kandarian dagger. Joseph eventually manages to kill Thea. However, after her encounter with Thea, Polly has also become possessed by a deadite. Polly uses her powers to manipulate the traumatized Susan and convinces her to let Deadite Edgar into the house. Susan kisses Edgar and slowly begins to fall under the control of the Deadite. While being possessed, Susan tries to get Joseph to reveal where he has hidden the Kandarian dagger. Edgar then attacks the family, breaking a promise he had made to Susan that he would leave Joseph alone. In the middle of all the chaos, Alice hides and starts remembering the horrible abuse she suffered from Will during their marriage. Alice grabs a rotary saw for protection and eventually finds Susan, but Polly suddenly attacks her. Polly brutally damages Alice's right ear, leaving her partially deaf. However, Alice manages to fight back and uses a stair lift to overpower Polly. Joseph is badly wounded after Edgar attacks him, and he eventually dies from his injuries. Alice and Susan then escape into the bathroom. Alice ties Susan up and confronts her about Will's abusive behavior in the past. Susan finally admits that she hates Alice and then becomes completely possessed by the deadite. Alice fights Susan off and escapes to the attic where she finally discovers the Kandarian dagger. Suddenly, deadite Joseph attacks her. Alice manages to use the dagger to kill him, freeing Joseph's body from the deadite possession. Alice then runs onto the roof while Susan and Edgar chase after her. During the chase, Alice accidentally drops the Kandarian dagger. She climbs back into the house through the chimney and manages to decapitate Susan. She then uses the rotary saw to seriously wound Edgar before setting the entire house on fire. Alice finds Max and uses the Kandarian dagger to kill the possessed dog before collapsing from her injuries. But the nightmare isn't over yet. Will arrives at the burning house and begins chasing Alice toward a nearby construction site. After a long and brutal fight, Alice manages to trap Will inside a pit filled with tar. She then finishes him off using a jackhammer and the Kandarian dagger. As the sun begins to rise, paramedics finally arrive at the scene and rescue Alice. In a mid credit scene, it is revealed that Polly, who is still possessed by a deadite, somehow escaped from the burning house. A passing motorist discovers Polly crawling away from the scene. But Polly suddenly attacks the motorist by scratching their leg, transferring the deadite possession to them. Then, in a post credit scene, the daughter of the crematorium manager discovers the unclaimed ashes of Ellie Bixler. Suddenly, dead-eyed Ellie emerges from the ashes and kills her. Sohela Yakub. As Alice Price, Sohela Yakub anchors the film as Alice Price, the grieving widow at the center of the escalating nightmare. Born on the 29th of June 1992 in Geneva, Switzerland, to a Tunisian father and a Flemish mother, Yaqub grew up navigating multiple cultural identities. She has spoken about embracing her mixed heritage without allowing industry stereotypes to limit the range of characters she plays. As a teenager, she committed fully to rhythmic gymnastics, attending La Haute École Fédérale de Sport de Macolin and joining the Swiss national rhythmic gymnastics team. She competed at the 2009 and 2010 World Rhythmic Gymnastics Championships. When the team failed to qualify for the Olympics, she left the sport at 16 and redirected her physical discipline toward performance. She later trained at the Conservatoire National Supérieur d'Art Dramatique in Paris, adding formal dramatic technique to the body control she had already mastered. Yaqub's screen breakthrough came with Gaspar Noé's Climax 2018, in which she played Lou, a dancer caught in a spiraling psychedelic nightmare. The role demanded extreme physical and emotional exposure, qualities that later proved relevant to the relentless physical demands of an Evil Dead film. Subsequent credits include the Canal Plus miniseries Savages 2019, Cedric Kahn's Making of 2023, and a supporting turn as Shishakli in Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 2024. These projects established her as an actress comfortable moving between European art house intensity and large scale Hollywood productions. Her casting as Alice was announced in May 2025, positioning her as the emotional and physical engine of Evil Dead Burn. In the film, Alice arrives at the Price family lake house after the death of her husband's will. The in laws blame her for the circumstances of the crash that killed him. What begins as uneasy familial tension rapidly becomes a fight for survival as deadites claim the household one by one. Yaqub's performance is required to carry both the quiet devastation of grief and the explosive physicality of the later action sequences. She wields a rotary saw, navigates the burning house, and ultimately confronts the possessed remains of her husband with a jackhammer and the Kandarian dagger. Director Sebastian Vanecek has emphasized the relentless nature of the production. Yakub herself described the experience as discovering the horror on set as we go, calling it the most fun she had experienced in that discovery process. Her background in competitive gymnastics provided the stamina and body awareness necessary for the extended practical effects sequences that define the film's second half. The choice of a relatively young European actress with limited prior American studio exposure reflects a deliberate shift in the franchise's casting strategy. Previous Evil Dead leads have often been American or Australian performers already familiar to genre audiences. Yaqub's selection signals an interest in bringing a different physical and cultural presence into the Deadite mythology while still delivering the visceral performance style the series demands. Her ability to move fluidly between vulnerability and ferocity allows Alice to function both as a classic final girl figure and as a more complicated character whose marital history is gradually revealed through flashbacks of abuse. That complexity is sustained across the film's 109-minute runtime without diluting the gore or the comic book energy that fans expect. Yaqub's physical training becomes especially evident in the sequences where Alice is forced into prolonged combat. The rotary saw fight, the chimney escape, and the final confrontation at the construction site all require precise control of body weight, timing, and recovery under simulated injury. Her gymnastics history allowed her to execute these moments with a clarity that keeps the violence readable even when the camera is shaking and the practical blood is flying. At the same time, the quieter scenes, Alice sitting through the tense family dinner, discovering the Necronomicon research, or confronting Susan in the bathroom demand an interiority that her earlier dramatic work prepared her to deliver. The combination of athletic precision and emotional openness makes the character's arc feel continuous rather than bifurcated into drama and horror modes. Hunter Doohan, as Joseph Price Hunter Doohan, plays Joseph Price, Alice's brother in law, and the family member most deeply immersed in the occult research that sets the plot in motion. Born on the 18th January 1994 in Fort Smith, Arkansas, Doohan is the son of Australian tennis player Peter Doohan and Angie Harper Carmichael. He spent his early years moving around the American South before focusing on acting. After high school, he interned at Elizabeth Barnes Casting in Los Angeles, worked as a background extra, waiter, and Universal Studios tour guide while studying and auditioning. His early screen work included the younger version of Aaron Paul's character in the Apple TV Plus series Truth Be Told, 2019. He gained wider recognition as Adam Desiato opposite Bryan Cranston in Showtime's Your Honor, 2020, and then as Tyler Galpin in Tim Burton's Netflix series Wednesday, 2022 present. Additional credits include Daredevil, Born Again, 2025. Doohan's casting was confirmed in May 2025 alongside Lucian Buchanan and Tandi Wright. In Evil Dead Burn, Joseph is the first family member to uncover the Kandarian dagger and his late grandfather Benjamin's research into the Necronomicon. His curiosity directly precipitates the initial Deadite attack. As the story progresses, he becomes both protector and eventual victim, dying from wounds inflicted by the possessed Edgar before returning as a deadite himself. Doohan has spoken about the relentless tone of the script and the production, noting that the cast was warned in advance about the physical and emotional toll. He described the experience as delivering exactly what the actor signed up for, adding that he would do it again without hesitation. The role requires Doohan to shift rapidly from scholarly curiosity to panic survival and finally to demonic aggression. His television work had already demonstrated an ability to portray characters who contain both vulnerability and latent danger. Tyler Galpin in Wednesday is a clear precedent, a young man whose outward charm masks a capacity for violence. Joseph Price operates in a similar register, though the violence is externalized through possession rather than internal struggle. Doohan's physical presence, tall, lean, capable of both quiet intensity and explosive movement, suits the practical effects heavy style Vani check inherited from the franchise's earlier entries and from his own film Infested. The decision to cast an actor primarily known for prestige television rather than pure horror indicates an attempt to broaden the emotional range of the supporting ensemble. Joseph is not a disposable victim. His research provides the film's mythological scaffolding, and his eventual death and possession carry narrative weight. Doohan's performance is required to make the audience care about the loss of that scaffolding before the film pivots fully into survival horror. In the early sequences, he is the one who handles the dagger and the book with a mixture of excitement and caution, giving the audience a window into the lore without lengthy exposition dumps. Later, when he is wounded and dying, the same physicality that made him look capable becomes a source of pathos. The body that once moved with purpose now fails under the weight of injury and infection. Lucian Buchanan as Thea Lucian Buchanan portrays Thea, Joseph's girlfriend, and one of the first major characters to undergo full deadite transformation after the initial outbreak. Born on the 18th July 1993 in Auckland, New Zealand, Buchanan is of Tongan and Scottish descent. Raised in Herne Bay, she grew up in a household where Tongan was spoken, but her mother insisted on full English acquisition for socioeconomic reasons. She began acting as a teenager, studying at TEPAC's acting for screen course under Fiona Edgar, and later earned a Bachelor of Arts in Drama and Psychology from the University of Auckland in 2017. Early New Zealand credits include The Blue Rose and Filthy Rich. Her international breakthrough arrived with the starring role of Rose Larkin in Netflix's The Night Agent, one of the platform's most watched English language series. Buchanan's casting was announced in the same May 2025 wave as Doohan and Wright. In the film, Thea arrives at the lake house as a supportive outsider. After Edgar's possession and the subsequent car crash, she is murdered and returns as a deadite. Her subsequent attack on the family is among the film's most brutal sequences. She tricks grandmother Polly into releasing her from the basement and then systematically assaults the household while searching for the Kandarian dagger. Joseph eventually kills her, but not before she has inflicted lasting damage and set further possessions in motion. Buchanan's background in both drama and psychology informs an approach to character that emphasizes internal motivation even when the character becomes a demonic force. She has spoken about using psychological insight to understand why characters make extreme decisions. That interest is useful for a role that must transition from warm supporting presence to relentless antagonist within a compressed time frame. Her New Zealand roots also align with the production's decision to shoot principally in New Zealand, allowing her to work in a familiar environment while bringing a Pacific perspective into a franchise historically dominated by North American and European performers. The role of Thea functions as a pressure valve for the film's escalating violence. Once she turns, the remaining human characters can no longer treat the threat as abstract or distant. Buchanan's physical performance, combined with the practical makeup and effects, makes the transformation feel immediate and irreversible. Her presence also expands the film's demographic representation without turning the casting into a checklist exercise. The character is written as an integrated member of the family unit rather than an outsider defined solely by ethnicity. In the basement sequence and the subsequent rampage, Buchanan has to convey both the residual personality of Thea and the pure malice of the deadite, a dual register that requires precise control of voice, posture, and eye contact. The result is one of the film's most memorable early set pieces. Tandi Wright, as Susan Price. Tandi Wright plays Susan Price, the matriarch of the family and mother to Joseph and Will. Born on the 4th of May 1970 in Zambia and raised in New Zealand, Wright has built a career spanning more than 25 years across film, television, and theatre in New Zealand, Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. She first gained national recognition as Nurse Caroline Buxton on the long-running soap Shortland Street, 1995-2000. Subsequent credits include 7 periods with Mr. Gomsby, Nothing Trivial, Power Rangers SPD as the voice of Isenia Kruger, Black Sheep, Out of the Blue, Legend of the Seeker, Jack the Giant Slayer, The Return, Ty West's Pearl, Love and Monsters, and more recent work in Went Up the Hill and Mr. Irrelevant. She has also worked as an intimacy coordinator, reflecting a broader engagement with the practical and ethical dimensions of screen performance. Wright's casting as Susan was announced alongside Doohan and Buchanan in May 2025. In Evil Dead Burn, Susan is initially antagonistic toward Alice, blaming her for Will's death. After Edgar's possession and the subsequent chaos, she is manipulated by the possessed Polly into allowing Edgar back into the house. She kisses her husband, begins to succumb to possession herself, and ultimately becomes a full deadite who pursues Alice through the burning house. Wright's performance must therefore traverse maternal protectiveness, simmering resentment, gradual corruption, and finally outright demonic hostility. The role benefits from Wright's extensive experience with long form character development on New Zealand television. Soap and drama series demand the ability to sustain emotional arcs across many episodes. Here, that skill is compressed into a single intense feature. Her presence also supplies generational weight. As the mother of adult sons and the wife of Edgar, she represents the established family order that the Deadites systematically dismantle. Her eventual possession is particularly effective because the audience has already seen her as a figure of authority and emotional resistance. Wright's dual professional identity as actress and intimacy coordinator may have been an asset during production. Evil Dead films require close physical contact, simulated violence, and moments of extreme vulnerability. An actor who understands the protocols of safe intimacy work can help maintain professional boundaries even when the material is designed to feel chaotic and unsafe. That dual expertise aligns with the production's reported emphasis on preparing the cast for the relentless nature of the shoot. In the bathroom confrontation with Alice, Wright has to play both the remaining human guilt and the rising demonic influence, a layering that gives the scene its particular nastiness. Errol Shand as Edgar Price. Errol Shand portrays Edgar Price, the family patriarch whose private visit to Will's coffin initiates the first major outbreak. After being burned and infected by the deadite Will, Edgar returns to the lake house and slowly succumbs. During a tense dinner, he stabs the family dog Max to death, collapses, and later fully transforms. His subsequent attacks on the remaining family members drive much of the film's middle act violence. Shan's performance must convey the gradual loss of humanity while still retaining enough of Edgar's original personality to make the transformation disturbing rather than purely monstrous. Shand is a New Zealand actor with a substantial body of local and international work. His casting continues the production's heavy reliance on New Zealand talent, a practical decision given that principal photography took place in the country from July to October 2025. The role of Edgar requires physical commitment. The character is burned, crashes a car, and engages in extended combat sequences. Shand's screen presence supplies the necessary gravitas for a patriarchal figure whose collapse signals the complete breakdown of the family unit. The dinner table scene in particular hinges on his ability to shift from stern authority to sudden, inexplicable violence without warning, a tonal pivot that sets the remainder of the night in motion. Maud Davy, as Polly Price Maud Davy, plays Polly Price, the grandmother whose encounter with Deadite Thea leads to her own possession. Polly manipulates Susan into opening the door for Edgar and later ambushes Alice, temporarily deafening her. In a mid-credit sequence, the still possessed Polly escapes the burning house and infects a motorist, ensuring the deadite threat continues. Davies' performance balances frail elderly vulnerability with sudden demonic cunning. The contrast is essential to the film's tonal shifts between domestic tension and outright horror. Davy is an Australian actress and theatre artist with a long career in both countries. Her presence adds another layer of generational depth. Polly represents the oldest living link to the family's history and, by extension, to the occult research that Benjamin Price conducted. Once she turns, that history becomes a weapon. The mid-credit sting involving Polly underscores the franchisee's traditional refusal to offer clean closure. The infection continues beyond the main narrative. Davies' ability to play both the doting grandmother and the calculating deadite gives the character a dual life that lingers after the final credits. George Puller as William Will Price George Puller appears as Will Price, Alice's abusive late husband, whose death and subsequent possession drive the entire plot. In the opening sequence, Will crashes his car into deadite Jessica, burns to death, and is infected. His corpse later breaks out of the coffin at the crematorium, kills the cremator, and infects Edgar. In the climax, the fully resurrected deadite Will pursues Alice to a construction site where she traps him in tar and finishes him with a jackhammer and the Kandarian dagger. Puller's dual task is to establish Will as a human character with a history of domestic violence, revealed through Alice's flashbacks, and then to embody the most persistent deadite threat. Pular is a New Zealand actor whose casting again reflects the production's local focus. The role is limited in screen time but high in narrative importance. Will is both the emotional catalyst for Alice's arrival and the final physical obstacle she must overcome. The revelation of his abusive behavior reframes Alice's survival not merely as a fight against supernatural evil, but as a rejection of the human cruelty she endured in life. Fuller's performance must therefore support both the realistic flashbacks and the exaggerated deadite aggression. The construction site climax depends on his ability to make the possessed will feel like a continuation of the same controlling force Alice once lived with, now amplified by supernatural power, supporting and cameo performances. Victory Nandukwe appears as Leo Keanu Karim as Jared and Tapiwa Soropa as Mike, listed in some credits as server. These characters populate the early sequences around the crematorium and the lake house, providing additional victims and witnesses before the core family unit is fully isolated. Lara McGregor plays the crematorium manager, Shyama Singh the cremator, Jake, Greta Vanden Brink the deadite Jessica, who initiates the chain of infection, and Coco White, the manager's daughter. Zoe Brunton appears as a woman, Keegan Carr Franch as a firefighter, Justin Ben as a taxi driver, and Dax as Max the family dog. Alan Shaba provides the voice of Alice's father, Alyssa Sutherland, who played Ellie in Evil Dead Rise, returns in a post-credit sequence as Deadite Ellie emerging from unclaimed ashes. Bruce Campbell, the franchise's original Ash Williams, appears in photographs as Benjamin Price, the grandfather whose research into the Necronomicon sets the mythology in motion. The cameo is consistent with Campbell's ongoing executive producer involvement and with the franchise's tradition of acknowledging its own history without requiring the actor to perform extensive new action sequences. The photographs serve as a quiet bridge between the current story and the larger lore, reminding viewers that the Price family's entanglement with the book is not accidental. Casting strategy and production context. The overall casting of Evil Dead Burn reflects several concurrent priorities. First, the decision to shoot in New Zealand from the 22nd of July to the 17th of October 2025 created a practical incentive to draw heavily from the local talent pool. Tandi Wright, Lucian Buchanan, Errol Shand, George Pullard, Maud Davey, and several supporting players are New Zealand based or New Zealand trained. This approach reduced travel and accommodation costs while giving the production access to experienced professionals familiar with both local industry conditions and international co productions. Second, the lead role went to a European actress with a background in extreme physical performance and art house intensity. Suheila Yaqub's gymnastics training and her work with Gaspar Noé positioned her to meet the franchise's demand for bodies that can endure prolonged practical effects, stunt work, and emotional extremity. Her relative lack of prior American studio exposure also allowed the film to introduce a fresh face rather than relying on established genre stars. Third, the supporting male lead and key female supporting roles were filled by actors with strong television profiles. Hunter Doohan's work in Wednesday and Your Honor and Lucian Buchanan's starring turn in The Night Agent brought contemporary streaming recognition into a theatrical horror release. This cross platform visibility is useful for a franchise that must continually recruit new audiences while satisfying long term fans. Fourth, the production maintained franchise continuity. through executive producers Sam Raimi, Rob Tappert, and Bruce Campbell, and through the brief return of Alyssa Sutherland. These elements reassure existing fans that the new installment remains connected to the larger mythology even as the central cast changes. The casting process itself began in May 2025 after Vanichek had already been attached as director and co-writer with Florent Bernard. The speed of the announcements, Jakob first, followed quickly by Doohan, Buchanan, and Wright, suggests that the creative team moved efficiently once the project was greenlit for production. Filming began only 2 months later, indicating that contracts and schedules were coordinated with unusual rapidity for a mid budget studio horror film. Physical and emotional demands on the ensemble, multiple cast members have publicly described the production as relentless. The script delivers continuous escalation with little downtime for either characters or performers. Practical effects, burns, prosthetics, blood, and complex stunt sequences require long hours in makeup and repeated takes under physically taxing conditions. Yakub's gymnastics background, Duhan's willingness to embrace the intensity, and Wright's dual experience as actress and intimacy coordinator all contributed to the ensemble's ability to sustain that pace across a 3 month shoot. The New Zealand location further shaped the working environment. Shooting in a country with a strong tradition of practical effects and genre filmmaking provided access to experienced crews and facilities. The cast therefore worked within a system already accustomed to the logistical and safety demands of high intensity horror. Long days in prosthetic makeup, repeated exposure to practical fire and blood effects, and the need to maintain performance energy through multiple takes of the same violent sequence placed unusual demands on stamina and focus. The ensemble's collective ability to meet those demands is visible in the finished film's unbroken intensity, character dynamics, and ensemble chemistry. The ensemble is structured as a family unit under extreme pressure. Alice is the outsider by marriage. Susan and Edgar are the parents who blame her. Joseph is the brother in law who becomes her temporary ally. Thaya is the girlfriend who becomes an early threat. Polly is the grandmother whose possession accelerates the collapse. Will is the absent husband whose return as a deadite forces the final confrontation. This configuration allows the film to explore themes of blame, inheritance, abuse, and survival within a classic siege structure. Casting choices reinforce these dynamics. Yakub's relative youth and international background mark Alice as distinct from the older, more established New Zealand performers who play the prize blood relatives. Doohan's television honed intensity suits a character who begins as a researcher and ends as both victim and threat. Buchanan's ability to shift from warmth to menace makes Thaya's transmission effective. Wright's authority and experience ground Susan's arc from resentment to possession. Shand, Devi, and Puller complete the generational spectrum, ensuring that every age group within the family is represented and ultimately corrupted. The chemistry among the principal performers is essential to selling the early domestic tension. Before any deadite appears, the audience must believe that this is a family already fractured by grief and unspoken accusations. The dinner table scene, the private conversations between Susan and Edgar, and the awkward attempts at hospitality toward Alice all depend on the actor's ability to convey years of shared history in a few loaded glances and carefully chosen lines. Once the possessions begin, that same chemistry is inverted. The people who once protected one another become the primary sources of danger. The performer's prior work in both intimate drama and high stakes genre material prepared them for this inversion. Franchise context for the casting choices earlier, Evil Dead films established different casting templates. The original trilogy centered on Bruce Campbell's Ash as a lone or semi lone survivor. The 2013 reboot focused on a group of friends. Evil Dead Rise used a mother and her children in an urban apartment setting. Evil Dead Burn returns to a more isolated, rural family gathering while introducing a widow as the central figure. The choice of Yakub as that widow continues the franchise's recent interest in female driven stories without repeating the specific maternal focus of the previous entry. The supporting cast's heavy New Zealand component also distinguishes the film from its predecessors, most of which were shot and cast primarily in North America. The local talent brings a different vocal texture and physical presence to the Price family, grounding the supernatural events in a specific cultural and geographic reality, even as the mythology remains universal. The brief returns of Alyssa Sutherland and the photographic presence of Bruce Campbell serve as connective tissue, ensuring that the new ensemble does not feel entirely disconnected from the larger series. The casting of actors with strong television backgrounds further reflects the current media landscape. Viewers who first encountered Doohan or Buchanan on streaming platforms arrive at the theatrical release already familiar with their screen personas, lowering the barrier to emotional investment. At the same time, the more seasoned stage and film performers, Wright Davy Shand, supply the gravitas required for the older generation of the family. The result is an ensemble that feels both contemporary and rooted, capable of carrying the film's mixture of domestic drama and extreme horror without either element overwhelming the other. Detailed role requirements and performance challenges. Alice's arc demands that Yakub remain the audience's primary point of identification even as the character is isolated, injured, and forced into increasingly extreme acts of violence. The flashbacks to Will's abuse must be played with enough specificity that they reframe the entire story without stopping the forward momentum. The rotary saw sequence and the final jackhammer confrontation require not only physical endurance but the ability to convey determination and terror simultaneously. Yakub's prior experience with extreme physical states in climax and her athletic training made her uniquely suited to these demands. Joseph's trajectory requires Doohan to begin as the most knowledgeable and relatively calm member of the group and end as both a corpse and a returning threat. The research scenes early in the film must establish him as intelligent and curious without making him seem reckless. Once the possessions start, his attempts to protect the others and his eventual failure must feel like genuine tragedy rather than mere plot mechanics. The possession makeup and performance in his final scenes demand a complete transformation of posture, voice, and facial expression while still allowing the audience to recognize the original character underneath. Thaya's transformation is one of the film's earliest and most abrupt. Buchanan must establish the character's warmth and loyalty in a relatively short amount of screen time so that her later return as a deadite carries maximum impact. The basement sequence and the subsequent rampage require sustained physical aggression and vocal distortion while preserving enough of the original personality to make the possession feel personal. The psychological training Buchanan brought to the role helped her map the internal logic of a character who is both herself and not herself. Susan's path from resentful mother in law to fully possessed antagonist is longer and more gradual. Wright must calibrate the early scenes so that the audience understands her hostility toward Alice without making her irredeemable. Once the infection begins, the performance has to track the slow erasure of the human personality. The bathroom confrontation is the climax of this arc and requires Wright to play both remaining maternal instinct and pure demonic force in the same moments. Her long experience with complex female characters on New Zealand television prepared her for this layered work. Edgar's infection is the first major possession after Will and therefore sets the template for how the family will respond. Shand must make the early signs. The burns, the collapse, the sudden violence at the dinner table feel both shocking and inevitable. Later, as a full deadite, he becomes one of the primary physical threats, requiring strength and timing in the combat sequences. The role asks for both the authority of a patriarch and the abandon of a monster. Polly's possession is quieter and more cunning. Davy must first establish the grandmother as a figure of relative safety and tradition. Once turned, the same soft voice and frail body become tools of manipulation. The mid-credit sequence depends on the audience's residual affection for the character so that her continued existence as a vector of infection feels especially unsettling. Will's dual presence as both human memory and final antagonist places unique demands on Puller. The flashbacks must be played with enough realism that the abuse feels lived in rather than schematic. The deadite version must then amplify this same controlling energy into pure supernatural force. The construction site climax is the longest continuous action sequence involving the character and requires sustained physical intensity across multiple beats of pursuit, struggle, and eventual destruction, ensemble cohesion, and collaborative performance beyond individual roles. The film depends on the ensemble's ability to function as a unit. The early scenes of familial tension require the performers to listen to one another and respond in ways that feel specific to long standing relationships. Once the deadites begin to appear, the remaining human characters must convey shared panic, mutual distrust, and momentary alliances under extreme pressure. The production's intensive schedule and practical effects demands meant that the cast spent long periods together in makeup and on set, creating the conditions for genuine group chemistry to develop. The mixture of international and local performers also created a productive tension. Yakub and Doohan brought perspectives shaped by European cinema and American television, while the New Zealand contingent brought the specific rhythms of local screen performance. The resulting blend gives the Price family a texture that feels neither purely American nor purely regional, allowing the story to sit comfortably within the larger franchise while still feeling fresh. The casting of Evil Dead Burn ultimately prioritizes performers capable of sustaining both the intimate and the extreme. Every principal role requires the ability to move between quiet emotional beats and full throated horror without losing continuity of character. The selected ensemble meets that requirement through a combination of athletic training, dramatic experience, psychological insight, and prior work in high intensity genres. The result is a cast that can carry the film's particular mixture of family drama and relentless supernatural violence, from the first tense dinner to the final moments of survival. Evil Dead Burn 2026. Production development and pre production talk of a new chapter in the Evil Dead franchise surfaced in February 2024 when it was reported that a follow up connected to 2023's Evil Dead Rise was moving forward. French filmmaker Sébastien Vanitschek was brought on to direct from a script he co-wrote with Florent Bernard. Series creator Sam Raimi is said to have sought Vanitschek out after watching Infested 2023, the director's feature debut, and coming away impressed by his handling of tension and body horror on a contained scale. Raimi and longtime collaborator Rob Tappert produced the film through their Ghost House Pictures banner, the same shingle behind every prior entry in the series. Bruce Campbell, the actor whose Ash Williams performance effectively built the franchise's identity, signed on as an executive producer alongside Lee Cronin, who had written and directed Evil Dead Rise. Their involvement was presented at the time as a continuity marker, evidence that the new film, despite a new director and setting, would remain tethered to the creative lineage Raimi had shepherded since 1981. Casting news arrived in May 2025. Suhaila Yaqub was announced as the lead, playing a woman named Alice Price, with the project confirmed as co-financed by New Line Cinema and Sony Pictures and targeting a summer 2026 release. Later that same month, Hunter Doohan, Lucian Buchanan, and Tandi Wright joined the ensemble, filling out the Price family at the center of the story. The finished cast also came to include Errol Shand, Maud Davey, George Pollard, Tapiwa Soropa, Keanu Karim, Alan Chabat, and Greta Van Den Brink. The story follows Alice in the aftermath of her husband's death as she travels to stay with his family, including researchers with a history tied to demonic possession at their isolated home. What begins as an attempt to find comfort curdles into horror as her in laws are picked off and turned into deadites one at a time, transforming a morning gathering into what several outlets later described as a family reunion from hell. Multiple reviewers noted that the screenplay folds the emotional wreckage of an abusive marriage into the premise, giving the Deadites taunting dialogue a pointed gaslighting edge rather than the more free associative menace of earlier films in the series. Around the same period, this project was taking shape. Ghost House Pictures separately confirmed development on yet another Evil Dead installment, later known as Evil Dead Wrath, with Francis Gallopi attached to write and direct at Raimi's invitation, signaling the studio's intent to keep multiple films moving through the pipeline rather than treating Burn as an isolated sequel. Filming principal photography began in New Zealand on July 22, 2025. Philip Lozano served as director of photography, working alongside a production team that included production designer Nick Connor, costume designer Sarah Woon, and makeup and creature effects designer Jane O'Kane. Vanecek documented portions of the shoot on social media, marking the first day of filming publicly before the production wrapped on October 17, 2025, roughly 3 months after cameras first rolled. The shoot leaned heavily on practical craft coverage tied to the film's eventual home media release specifically highlights an ambitious single continuous take built into the film, a sequence requiring tight choreography between the cast, camera operators, and effects crew to execute without a cut, and later singled out by trade press as one of the production's most technically demanding set pieces. Post production editing was handled by Maxime Caro, who worked with Vanecek and Lozano to assemble the film's violence into tightly choreographed sequences. Reviewers later pointed to whip pans, top down tracking shots, and extended long takes as recurring tools the editing and camera departments used together to keep the carnage legible despite its intensity. Fangoria's Michael Jingold reported that Vanecek had to trim one particularly graphic sequence during post production specifically to secure an R rating rather than an NC 17. even as multiple critics still described the finished cut as the goriest entry the franchise had produced to that point. Post production also encompassed the practical stunt and fire effects work that Jane Auken's team executed on set, later broken out as its own making of featurette rather than folded into general behind the scenes coverage, an indication of how central practical carnage was to the film's identity going into release. Music. The score was composed by Double Danger, the Paris-based duo of Douglas Kavana and Xavier Cass, who previously worked with Vanitschek on Infested. The pair, who describe themselves as self-taught and interested in pushing past conventional, academically trained approaches to film composition, built a score for Burn that leans into sustained dread rather than jump scare stingers. Matching the slower building tone several critics noted in the film itself. Water Tower Music released the official soundtrack album digitally in early July 2026, just ahead of the film's theatrical debut. The album runs to roughly 33 tracks and about 72 minutes, drawing its titles directly from moments and lines in the film. Track names like Behind Rune and Hex, Goodbye to My Son, and The Book of the Dead reflect specific beats in Alice's story. The record closes with Paradise, a collaboration between Double Danger and French singer Chilla, functioning as something closer to a needle drop closing credits track than a score cue. Beyond the original score, the finished film also incorporates pre-existing French chanson recordings at key emotional moments. A Jacques Brel song plays during a wedding-related flashback set at a crematorium, and a track by Alain Barrière scores the sequence in which Alice sets the Price family home ablaze, a needle drop choice that ties directly into the film's title. Waxwork Records subsequently partnered with Water Tower Music to issue a deluxe 2 LP vinyl pressing of the score for collectors. Release theatrical Evil Dead Burn was originally dated for July 24, 2026, before the release was moved earlier. As finalized, the film opened in France and Italy on July 8, 2026, followed by a wider release in the United States on July 10, 2026. Warner Bros. Pictures distributed the film domestically, while Sony Pictures Releasing International handled distribution across most international markets, with two notable exceptions carved out contractually: the United Kingdom, where Studio Canal UK distributed the film, and France, where Metropolitan Film Export handled release. An early promotional screening was held on February 24, 2026, months ahead of the film's wide release, giving genre audiences an initial read on the finished cut. A teaser trailer followed in mid-April 2026, first shown publicly ahead of screenings of Lee Cronin's The Mummy, a pairing that put the new Evil Dead footage in front of an audience already primed for horror. Domestically, the film opened wide into 3,004 theaters across North America. Home media Warner Bros. confirmed a home entertainment plan that moved unusually fast relative to the theatrical run. The film became available on premium digital platforms, including the Apple TV Store, Amazon Prime Video, YouTube, Google Play, Fandango, and Vudu in the United States and Canada on August 4, 2026, roughly 25 days after its theatrical opening. Physical media followed about 7 weeks later with 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray and DVD editions arriving on September 22nd, 2026 through Warner Bros. Discovery Home Entertainment. The home releases carry a set of bonus features built around the making of the film. Evil Dead Blazing the Trail, a broader documentary piece in which Wanichek and his crew discuss how the film balances franchise legacy against new creative choices. The Hot Shot, Evil Dead Burns one shot sequence, which walks through the planning and execution of the film's single continuous take, and This One's Gonna Burn, focused on the stunt work, practical effects, and firework used throughout the production. As of the home media announcement, no date had been set for the film's eventual streaming premiere on HBO Max, the service tied to Warner Bros. And New Line. Alongside the home video rollout, the film also crossed over into experiential marketing, inspiring haunted maze attractions built around its imagery for Universal Studios' Halloween Horror Nights events in both Orlando and Hollywood for the 2026 season. Reception box office Evil Dead Burn was made on a reported production budget of around $20 million, opening across 3,004 domestic theaters. It debuted to $13.7 million in North America, about 44% below the $24.5 million opening notched by Evil Dead Rise in 2023, and enough of a shortfall from pre-release tracking, which had pointed toward something closer to $20 million, that some trade outlets described the debut as a disappointment, or more bluntly, a flop relative to expectations. The film finished in fourth place for the weekend, behind a pair of holdover titles and newcomer Moana. International numbers were reported somewhat inconsistently in the days immediately following release, as estimates were updated with actuals. Running tallies for the worldwide opening weekend landed generally in the mid 20 million to high 20 million range once international grosses were folded in. By 10 days into its run, cumulative worldwide box office had reached approximately $51.4 million, about 24.2 million are domestic and $27, 2 million international, which analysts flagged as roughly the film's theatrical break-even point, using the industry rule of thumb that a wide theatrical release needs to gross somewhere near 2.5 times its production budget to clear costs. The film's second weekend saw a steep decline of around 64%, typical of horror releases that front load their audience in the opening frame. By late July 2026, with the film heading toward its digital release, cumulative worldwide grosses were being reported in the 63 to 64 million range, placing Evil Dead Burn as the third highest grossing installment in the six-film franchise to date. Behind Evil Dead rises $147 million worldwide total, and the 2013 Evil Dead reboots $97, 5 million, but ahead of the original trilogy's more modest theatrical hauls from earlier decades. Critical response: Evil Dead Burn holds a 71% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 141 reviews, with audiences scoring it more warmly. A popcorn meter score in the 80-81% range, notably higher than the audience number recorded for Evil Dead Rise 76. Even though Rise had scored higher with critics overall 85, critics were broadly aligned on 2 points: that Vanecek delivers some of the most visually inventive and technically ambitious violence the franchise has ever put on screen, and that the film asks more patience of its audience than prior entries. IndieWire's review described the experience as a shifting, almost physically taxing endurance test, moving between family drama, slapstick gore, and a more dreamlike register, influenced as much by French genre cinema as by the American splatter tradition the series was built on. The Rap's review credited Vanecek's showmanship while noting that the film's grim, karmic framing, visiting horror on people implicated in real emotional harm rather than random innocence, gives it an unusually punishing tone that takes time to acclimate to. Not every outlet was as enthusiastic about how the film balanced its gorier instincts against its more serious thematic material. In Review Online's write up argued that the film's attempt to seriously engage with domestic abuse and gaslighting through the Deadites' taunting dialogue was ultimately undercut by shock driven pacing, even while acknowledging the effectiveness of the gore itself. Slant magazine similarly credited Vanecek's personal directorial voice, carried over from Infested, while describing the overall tone as largely mirthless compared to earlier, more comedic entries in the series. Rotten Tomatoes critics roundup collected additional reactions from genre press. Geek Vibes Nation called it a consistently strong entry in a franchise without a genuine misfire. Silver Screen Riot and Fangoria both emphasized the sheer volume and inventiveness of the gore, with Fangoria's Michael Gingold noting that a particularly extreme sequence had reportedly been trimmed in post production just to secure an R rating, and Screen Rant framed the film as pulling together tonal elements from across every era of Raimi's original series into something new. Several reviews, including one from Flick Direct, remarked on just how much of the runtime is given over to graphic gore, cautioning viewers with weaker stomachs even as they praise the craft behind it. Although Evil Dead Burn is not due in cinemas until July 24. The next chapter of the Necronomicon is already being written behind the scenes. According to the industry magazine Deadline, another Evil Dead film is in the works. It will be directed and written by Francis Gallopi, who previously attracted attention with The Last Stop in Yuma Country. The cast includes Mortal Kombat actress Jessica McNamee as well as Josh Hellman and Ella Newton. Specific information on the plot and a start date are not yet known. The only thing that is certain is that the film will follow on directly from Evil Dead Burn, Evil Dead Through the Ages, the current status of a cult horror franchise. The Evil Dead series is one of the most enduring, influential, and versatile franchises in the horror genre. For over 4 decades, it has achieved something that many horror series fail to do. It remains relevant without losing its roots. From cheap indie shockers to grotesque splatter humor to modern prestige horror, Evil Dead has reinvented itself time and again. And this is precisely where its special status within the genre lies today. The beginnings, low budget, maximum influence. When Sam Raimi made his debut in 1981 with The Evil Dead, nobody could have imagined the reverberations this film would have. Shot on a minimal budget but with maximum creativity, the film set new standards for physical camera movements, handmade gore, and an uncompromising escalation of evil. The story about a group of young people who unleash demonic forces in a forest cabin was simple. The execution revolutionary. The film quickly became a cult classic and established Ash Williams, played by Bruce Campbell, as one of the most iconic characters in horror cinema. Horror meets humor. The Raimi era with Evil Dead 2 1987 and Army of Darkness 1992. The tone of the series shifted significantly. Raimi combined splatter with slapstick, horror with cartoon logic. Ash developed from a tortured survivor to a loudmouth anti hero. This mixture of comedy and horror was polarizing but formative. Evil Dead became synonymous with anarchic genre humor and influenced generations of filmmakers, from Peter Jackson to Edgar Wright. The series thus occupied a special position within the horror genre. It was brutal but never cynical, grotesque but deliberately playful. The reboot, brutal seriousness in 2013, the franchise ventured a radical reboot. Evil Dead by Fede Alvarez almost completely dispensed with humor and instead focused on uncompromising extreme body horror. The film divided the fan community but was praised by critics for its consistency and craftsmanship. In the context of the horror boom at the time, characterized by remakes and reboots, Evil Dead proved that the brand could work without Ash Williams. The film re-established the series as serious, hard horror material and opened the door for future interpretations. Series success and fan service. At the same time, Bruce Campbell made a comeback from 2015 with Ash vs. Evil Dead. The series combined the humorous Raimi trilogy with modern serial storytelling and explicit gore. It was a love letter to longtime fans, but at the same time, accessible to new viewers. Although the series ended after 3 seasons, it cemented the status of Evil Dead as a multimedia franchise and showed how flexible the universe is. Modern expansion, Evil Dead Rise and Co. With Evil Dead Rise 2023 The series took another decisive step forward. Director Lee Cronin moved the action from the classic forest cabin to an urban high-rise and combined family drama with brutal demon action. The film grossed around $147 million worldwide and became the biggest financial success of the series. It was not only the box office success that was decisive, but also the perception. Evil Dead was finally anchored in modern mainstream horror without losing its identity. Current status in the horror genre today, Evil Dead is considered one of the few horror franchises that enjoys great trust among both hardcore fans and studios. Unlike many brands, the series is not cannibalized on an annual basis, but developed further in a targeted manner. Each new entry is allowed to strike its own tone as long as central elements, the Necronomicon, demonic possession, physical horror, are retained. This makes Evil Dead more akin to a horror universe than a classic film series. Today, Evil Dead plays a special role in the horror genre. It is simultaneously a cult, a field of experimentation, and a safe brand. While other series such as Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre struggle with continuity and reboots, Evil Dead benefits from its thematic openness. Demons, possession, and physical decay are timeless motifs that can be reinterpreted again and again. Conclusion: the status of the Evil Dead films in the horror genre is stronger than ever. The series has proven that it can adapt to changing viewing habits without losing its core. It combines handmade horror with modern staging, respects its past, and at the same time looks to the future. At a time when many franchises are suffering from creative exhaustion, Evil Dead is a prime example of how enduring horror can work. Bold, flexible, and uncompromising. Time to dig up those library cards and check out that dog-eared copy of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis again. Not that the infamous Book of the Dead has much of a role to play in Evil Dead Burn, the sixth feature in Sam Raimi's long-running supernatural horror series, which started way back in 1981. The one useful nugget revealed in its sinister pages, this time, is the existence of an ancient dagger that is the sole means of killing a deadite for good. Naturally, the clan of freshly turned deadites will stop at nothing to get their hands on it before the miraculously uninfected final girl does. Director Sebastian Vanisek may have come along well after the new French extremity wave of the late 90s and early 2000s. His first feature, the effective 2023 rampaging spider shocker Infested, is on Shudder, but his taste for grisly carnage, vicious cruelty, spilled viscera, and bone crunching, hyper graphic violence is firmly rooted in that school. This is a movie that revels in its meanness. Release date Friday, July 10 cast: Suhaila Yaqub, Tandi Wright, Hunter Doohan, Lucian Buchanan, Errol Shand, Maud Davey, George Puller director, Sebastian Vanisek screenwriters. Sebastian Vanisek, Florent Bernard rated R. 1 hour 50 minutes excess clearly is the director's watchword, which seemed to dovetail nicely with the appetites of the hardcore horror preview crowd with whom I saw the film. Every new bit of skull crushing, goopy bloodletting, and creative weaponry improvisation was greeted with fist pumps, roars of approval, and more than a few grossed out cries of the fact that the script by Vanisek and fellow Frenchman Florent Bernard offers almost nothing unfamiliar in narrative terms is probably immaterial, though the new standalone entry could have used a more firmly established chief agent of malice like Alyssa Sutherland's monster mother in the last installment, Lee Cronin's Evil Dead Rise. This time it's dad who starts spreading hellfire through a different family, though the mounting deadite pileup means it's not long before he's just part of the demonic gang, not the main threat, like its 2023 predecessor, Evil Dead Burn. Starts with the brisk dispatch of secondary characters at a pretty lakeside spot. The film was shot in New Zealand, where buddies Jared Keanu Karim and Leo Tapiwa Soropa are fishing. When Leo goes off to take a cell phone call from his girlfriend, Jared gets a bite that makes his fishing rod buckle, reeling in what he assumes will be a big catch. Nuh-uh. Right off the bat, Vanisek shows he's not fooling around with a maximum brutality kill. By the time Leo returns, it's too late for them both. The deliverer of death, Greta Van Den Brink, once she's done levitating over the lake and wandered up onto the road, provides the link to the principal characters when she's splattered by a speeding car. The driver is Will George Puller, a hothead who storms off from a club mid-argument with his spiky French wife Alice, Suhela Yacoub, abandoning a birthday celebration for his brother Joe Hunter Doohan, there with his girlfriend Thea, Lucian Buchanan. Will's deadite collision results in some fiery retribution, making it three deaths even before the main title appears. Early hints that Will was an abusive husband appear to have a precedent in the snarling disposition of his father, Edgar Errol Shand, whose kindness mostly is reserved for his dog, until even that bond turns nasty. At Will's funeral, we also meet his sharp-edged grieving mother, Susan Tandy Wright, whose words during her eulogy, "I would give anything for us to be together again," prove portentous. Careful what you wish for. Edgar insists on a moment alone with his dead son before the coffin rolls into the crematorium furnace. He is startled by a knock that seems to come from inside the closed casket, but the chaos that ensues remains unseen, only heard in Sammy Bardet's malevolent soundscape. Back at the dilapidated family home, Edgar grows even surlier, lashing into gentle-natured Joe for being an underachiever compared to his brother and causing Thea to become apprehensive about Ed's proximity to sharp objects. Only Grandma Maud Davy, nattering away with advanced dementia, seems oblivious to the tension. Spoiler alert, not that you won't see it coming. But if you think absence of lucidity, a wheelchair, and a prosthetic leg will stop a crabby octogenarian from becoming a raging hellcat with the strength of a heavyweight wrestler, you have probably never seen an Evil Dead movie. And if you have, you should pretty much be able to predict the sequence of gruesome events that follows. Vanisek and Bernard draw the requisite connections to Evil Dead lore by making the main setting the rambling house where Will and Joe's historian grandfather conducted extensive Necronomicon research before abandoning the family to travel the world seeking information about mysterious cult known as the Circle of Wise Men, a negligible addition to the mythology. While Susan has insisted repeatedly that Joe dispose of Grandpa's collection of notes, drawings, artifacts, and a detailed scrapbook, he only half complies. Naturally, someone, in this case Alice, hauls the dreaded book out of a trash bag, reads that demonic forces are summoned by the utterance of an incantation, and proceeds to speak those gibberish words out loud. Big mistake, though arguably only slightly more stupid than Susan, who stacks the dishwasher cutlery rack with the knife's blade up. Were you raised by savages, lady? Along with the half baked theme of women who have toughened up to survive abusive men, xenophobic distrust of strangers plays a part in the chilly vibe of Will's parents toward Alice from the start. Granny doesn't discriminate, hissing invective at both Alice and Thea with equal venom. But Susan's hostility is more focused, side eyeing her daughter in law even at the funeral. Wright's performance is amusing in that she seems only a tad less spiteful in benign mode than when she gets with the demon program and starts shrieking at Joe. Bring me the Kandarian dagger. For a minute, I thought she said Kardashian, which would have been a marketing opportunity. As the assembled party one by one turn ferocious and the butchery intensifies, it's obvious who's going to be the last one standing. The fun, as always, is in spotting which objects will be repurposed as weapons. Those include a detached car seat headrest, a fancy fountain pen gifted to Joe by Will, an ugly ass candelabra, a corkscrew, and a chunk of porcelain from a smashed toilet bowl. Hello, unhygienic! Ribbons of free flying fishing line with hooks trussing up one character like a roast is not something you see every day. Of course, there are also nods to the beloved Raimi era chainsaw with power tools like a brush trimmer and a heavy duty hammer drill. Vanisek and DP Philip Lozano pump up the visual energy to match the unrelenting action. Lots of frenetic handheld camera work, swooping tracking shots, a virtuoso honor, a series trademark, low to the ground, high speed zoom through woodlands, and the usual disorienting framing, notably when characters start spider walking up walls and across ceilings or skittering over the roof. The score by French experimental duo Double Danger, also the composers on Infested, amplifies the action, building from ominous electronica to black mass level hysteria with satanic choral elements. And the tendency toward practical effects over CG is satisfying, highlighting makeup designer Jane O'Kane's gnarly work. There are moments of dark humor, but only one gag involving Grandma's motorized stair lift that could be called laugh out loud funny. Vanisek seems more interested in slathering on the gore to the point where the movie starts to seem less like a full bodied story than a string of hyper violent set pieces. Minor cuts reportedly were made to bring the MPA rating down from NC-17 to R. That also leaves the actors with little scope for character definition, limiting them to playing types. The Swiss actress Yacoub is compelling as Alice proves her resilience while never downplaying the nightmarish mental and physical torture she endures. I missed the antic spirit, the wicked sense of mischief, and the straight up goofy comedy that defined Raimi's originals, not to mention the unhinged madness of Bruce Campbell's beloved leading character, Ash. Raimi and Campbell serve as a producer and executive producer, respectively. The series' new iterations, starting with Fede Alvarez's 2013 soft reboot Evil Dead, have largely abandoned its roots as horror comedy in favor of orgiastic slaughter. There's no doubt an audience for that, but it's a whole other style that honors the early chapters in name alone. No more review the Deadites are indeed evil. They're mostly dead, but they're certainly not subtle. These demonic zombie like things would likely benefit from a bit more etiquette, a touch more introspection. It would mean fewer flying limbs for everyone. Take the case of their encounter with the Price family. The Prices possess something called the Kandarian dagger, a blade that's the only sure way to dispatch a deadite outside the creative use of power tools. Had the deadites simply invited the Prices over for tea and gently asked for the knife, they likely would have gotten it. Susan Price has been begging her son Joseph to throw away all his grandfather's occultic flotsam, of which the knife is a part, for years now. Why, Susan might even pay the Deadites to haul the junk away, giving them some extra cash for blood transfusions. Instead, a deadite, one formerly known as Jessica, apparently loiters by a lake, kills two fishermen, and jumps in front of a car conveniently driven by Susan's other son, Will. Once she lands inside the car through the windshield, she decapitates herself, utters a chilling message, and then sets the car on fire, killing Will in the process. Now, it would appear that killing the recipient of a message would hamper the message delivery process. But nay, Will naturally becomes a deadite himself, albeit a charred one. But he's in no hurry to make his presence known. During Will's cremation service, his father, Edgar, comes to say goodbye to his son one last time. Deadite Will begins knocking on the coffin lid. Edgar bashes open the coffin and, well, let's just reiterate. Deadites are not subtle, Parsic elements, as you might imagine. Positives are hard to come by in Evil Dead Burn, but the film does demonstrate the potential dangers of improperly used power tools, and broken toilets, and fountain pens, and car headrests, and, well, pretty much everything. Really spiritual elements in the Evil Dead franchise. The Deadites are called forth via a magic spell written in a book called the Necronomicon. Good old grandfather Price, collector of occultic antiquities, and whatnot, leaves a helpful recording about the evil character of the Deadites. Creatures, he says, are so malevolent. It's as if the devil himself were here. That grounds Evil Dead Burn in a world with vaguely Christian underpinnings. These deadites aren't just infected with some sort of reanimating virus, as we see in many a zombie tale. These are evil creatures who are likely freelancing for a far more diabolical, unseen entity. When Susan tells a table full of family members that Will's looking down at them from above, Will's father, in the process of becoming a deadite himself, disagrees and says he's down below. Later, Deadite will tell someone that he indeed went to hell, which perhaps implies he is on some sort of work furlough program. The Deadites come with a whole bunch of supernatural abilities too. They can perch on ceilings, set whole lakes a boiling, and speak quite clearly even when they have car headrests stuck in their faces. Despite Grandfather Price's experience with the occult, the prices we meet don't appear to be particularly religious. Joseph hopes to write a novel hinged to the evidence his grandfather left behind, but he initially sees it as fodder for fiction, not a real world threat. Will's funeral service feels rather secular. In old video footage of Will's wedding, marrying a critical character named Alice, we see all the trappings of a typical wedding, but no obvious priest or pastor officiating. Sexual and romantic content Will and Alice, before Will's untimely death, owned and run what is later called a restaurant. But let's not picture this as a place where you can order up a plate of pancakes. This is a raucous nightclub, and if they did serve pancakes, patrons would likely start pancake fights, and Will and Alice would be constantly scrubbing maple syrup off the walls. Joseph celebrates a birthday in said club, and moviegoers are given a completely unnecessary and utterly salacious videos collage of breasts and rears covered tightly and imperfectly by club style clothing. A number of male patrons aren't wearing shirts at all. That evening, while watching Will and Alice fight, Joseph's girlfriend, Thai, tells Joseph that they should never ever get married. A fully deadite Edgar plants a passionate kiss on fully living Susan, wherein the blood pooling in Edgar's mouth drips down both of their chins to the floor in a red saliva fused goo. You haven't kissed me like that in years. Susan says we see some of Alice's midriff. During an argument with Alice, Will says that none of his past girlfriends made him lose control like she does. Violent, content, deep breath. A deadite shoots himself in the head 3 times, none of which impacts his ability to talk or move or kill. While becoming a deadite, he tries to drive a knife through his arm too, an act prevented by Alice. Another deadite does apparently die after having her head smashed into a bloody pulp by a dishwasher door. Later, another living character has her face pushed into the goopy, cavernous maw left behind. A few deadites are undone by power tools, a circular bladed garden trimmer, and a jackhammer for starters. Others are dispatched by a magical knife. One deadite tries to cut off its own leg. A deadite has his face torn and his skull crushed by someone using bare hands. Deadites jam corkscrews into their own necks and press their faces against scorching hot radiators. In the movie's opening sequence, the deadite Jessica walks in front of Will's speeding car, causing it to tumble several times down an embankment. Her body is now halfway in the car, and her gore encrusted head slowly works itself loose from the rest of her body, eventually rolling onto the ground nearby. The living are naturally subjected to plenty of bodily indignities as well. Someone dies after getting hit and ultimately impaled by a car's headrest. A character falls into a dishwasher loaded with sharp implements and then gets pressed further into the blades. A slamming car door severs several fingers. Will is burned alive in his crashed car, and we later see his charred, still smoldering, and sometimes glowing remains shambling around. Someone has a leg pierced by a bit of rebar, forcing the character to painfully work the limb of the steel. A deadite stabs someone in the ear with a fountain pen. The fountain pen is used again later on. A dog is stabbed to death with a fork. A man is essentially boiled in a lake. He crawls to shore but falls unconscious soon thereafter. When someone walks over him, stepping on his hand, the skin sloughs off, revealing bone and gore underneath. Another man is somehow attacked with fishing line. The lines and hooks wrap the guy up. We see one hook puncturing his eyelid and drag him into a body of water where something pulls him apart. We don't see what, but when he's pulled out of the water, the man is missing the lower part of his body, his spine, and a bunch of innards trailing. But for all that blood and gore, the most disturbing element for some may be Will and Alice's abusive relationship. In flashbacks, we see the two engaged in angry arguments, and at one juncture, Will grabs Alice's face. During the party at the club, Will roughly grabs Alice by the arm and pulls her as well. When Alice lifts up her shirt in a couple of scenes, we see a bad burn along the side of her abdomen. But we also see in those flashbacks a hot stove and a pot of boiling water, water that we deduce caused that terrible scar. Someone is nearly suffocated with a shower curtain. People and deadites fight. They smash into walls, tumble downstairs, fall from some significant heights, and are sometimes literally thrown around. A character gets tied up. A circular blade nearly carves into a living person's head. A deadite is attacked with the same blade, and his skull is split open, though the deadite seems to still operate just fine. Someone gets stabbed in the eye with a shard of glass. Bodies are consumed in fire. People are choked with seat belts. Someone is murdered off camera. We see blood fly as the attack is carried out. Deadite Will can set things alight and burn people with a touch. Someone without legs drags herself along a street, about 35 F words and a dozen S words. We also hear and beach. God's name is misused 3 times. Jesus' name is abused twice, once with an assist from an F word. Drug and alcohol content. During Joseph's Birthday party at Will and Alice restaurant. Alice suggests their party of four get another bottle of champagne. When Will suggests that perhaps a third bottle is a bit much, Alice says there's nothing wrong with getting drunk on such occasions, and the movie clearly sides with Alice. Alice's cigarette use is another point of contention. Will would very much like to start a family, and he believes that Alice refuses to stop smoking as a way to avoid having kids. We see Alice and others smoke, and the movie turns Alice's cigarettes into a symbol of freedom from and rebellion against her abusive husband. Wine is served with a dinner. Polly, Susan's dementia stricken mother, is denied any. But she grabs a glass and drinks heartily when no one's looking. Will drives drunk, even though Joseph tries to stop him. It's a factor in his collision with the deadite that creates so much havoc. Other noteworthy elements: someone vomits. The dementia suffering Polly believes that someone is after her money, a recurring theme and joke throughout the film. Conclusion: the Evil Dead franchise has been shambling around since 1978, originating with a 20-minute $1,600 film by Sam Raimi called Within the Woods. It has morphed over time, moving from flat out horror to high camp to somewhere in between, but it has always been anchored to one key element: gore. That's it. The franchise has never been interested in subtext or internal consistency or even quality, even though they are often kindly reviewed, and the first two films are considered cult classics. Give the franchise credit for its honesty and clarity of purpose. It knows what its fans come for, and it give it to them in bloody, organ-spattered spades. Evil Dead movies have never been particularly interested in offering a coherent moral or message or even much hope beyond raw survival. But even by those cemetery low standards, Evil Dead Burn seems especially vacuous and dispiriting. In Evil Dead Burn, marriage is terrible. Friendships are pointless. Family is the root of all evil. Oh, and that's not me just being needlessly antagonistic. Watch the trailer and you'll read those exact words. Family is the root of all evil, and it doesn't stop there. The film tells us that getting drunk is just fine in certain circumstances, and the character who suggests otherwise is cast as the movie's biggest villain. It suggests that smoking is a worthwhile way to declare your independence from oppressive forces, reinforcing a contention shared by many class skipping 14-year-olds. The best defense against demonic forces isn't prayer but power tools. And while it's spoon feeding us these dubious messages, Evil Dead Burn is dumping jugs of blood on us and serving up a steady allotment of severed limbs. The Evil Dead franchise has already queued up its next installment. Evil Dead Wrath is set to debut in 2028, but perhaps moviegoers will then take their own magic knife, their lack of financial support, and bury this franchise for good. Paul Asay has been part of the plugged in staff since 2007, watching and reviewing roughly 15 quintillion movies and television shows. He's written for a number of other publications too, including Time, The Washington Post, and Christianity Today. The author of several books, Paul loves to find spirituality in unexpected places, including popular entertainment, and he loves all things superhero. His vices include James Bond films, Mountain Dew, and terrible B grade movies. He is married, has two children, and a neurotic dog, runs marathons on occasion, and hopes to someday own his own tuxedo. Feel free to follow him on Twitter at Asepol.